Hi everyone, it's Matt Jones here from NZHSP. I'm joined once again by the wonderful DeAnne Brabant, who is a Chief Solicitor at Morrison Kent Lawyers and was in a previous life a Chief Prosecutor for WorkSafe NZ. Now we've been fortunate enough to be joined by DeAnne on two occasions over the last couple of weeks since COVID-19 Level 4 was put into place. And I'm really glad to say that we are joined again here today, hot off the heels of our Prime Minister's announcements around what Level 3 will likely look like. So it's the first time we've heard some of these additional details. This is a live broadcast, so please feel free to ask questions as we talk. And between us, we'll do our very best to answer some of your questions. So DeAnne, welcome back.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
Really good, thank you. Yeah, really good. I'm enjoying my new digs. So I'm now in my new temporary workspace, which is a lovely container that's got wheels on it, which allows me to get back to business as usual, which is awesome. How about yourself? How's things?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, some of that essential business work is going to be quite different now. We're going to, as the Prime Minister said, safe businesses.
Yeah.
So some people are going to be back out working again, which is going to be nice in terms of the economy and also a bit more ability to recover, I guess, because striking the balance between dealing with the risk and also the risk to the economy is a particularly hard task, one would think. And quite a measured, I think from my view today, quite a measured response to returning back to work. I suppose some of the things that we'll see in there are very similar to what Australia's got in place at the moment. So construction back and plumbing, and you'll still be able to have somebody come and do the landscaping in your backyard. They're just not allowed to be more than 2 meters, 2 meters, they've got to be 2 meters at least away from you. So I suppose it's striking a balance or attempting to between being in full lockdown and then slowly coming back into work.
Speaking to a few people on and offline, I think there was a growing sense that the move from Level 4 downward was simply going to allow many to get back to business as usual. But I think it's really safe to say that that's not really going to be the case, that it's going to have to be a carefully managed and planned out return. So in your mind, for businesses that are now staring down the opportunity to get back onto construction sites, for example, or back into manufacturing plants, what are some of the things that, from your perspective, they need to consider before stepping back into the workplace?
Or just, some of them that were essential businesses had to deal with this anyway, that had to have the right hygiene practices, etc., in place, and think about bubbling and having people coming back into the workplace, and maybe having people on shifts where they stay with the same people when they're in the workplace, and thinking about a few things about, if somebody's unwell, then the encouragement should be actually not to be at work. I know that some construction sites were taking the temperature, etc., of people before they came in, but and that's an okay control measure, I guess. But like what we have been seeing in terms of the symptoms is not everybody has had a temperature either. So the best you can do is, and you're going to have to rely quite strongly on your workers being honest with you about whether they're well or not, and if somebody doesn't look well, then you're going to be sending them home because you don't want to expose everybody else to it. So we've got to all be adults and think we don't soldier on even though we're sick. We have to actually stay home. And even though you might be raring to get back to work, if you're actually not well, then you shouldn't be in the workplace because you put the other people in the workplace at risk.
Yeah, it's such an important point, particularly in New Zealand, where everyone seems to live by the concept of hardening up. Basically, you need to be on your deathbed in order to not turn up to work. This is completely the opposite to that now. Is if you're under the weather, you stay home. full stop. And I think a lot of businesses are going to have to really push that message home quite hard over the next little while to help manage that.
Well, especially too, because there is still we're doing well. The numbers are coming down, but in order to ensure that your workplace is going to keep running and not be impacted significantly, is also making sure your workplace remains well. So you don't want workers there that are unwell, and you want to create a culture whereby they actually report and say that they're not well and they don't come to work. And that other workers, if they think someone's not well, that they actually tell them to, sorry, I don't want you actually working with me at the moment because you're not well. I think people are probably now aware of the risks to themselves a bit more too. So I think that compliance, hopefully with hygiene practices, etc., will not be too hard to actually get your employees to be doing that, because but yeah, making sure that you're doing the right cleaning protocols in accordance with MB. Treat yourself like the essential services did during the time that they were continued to manufacture. Look at distancing and making sure that people can actually, if you are required to be in the workplace, that they can actually have the appropriate distancing from one another. That's if you can't do your work away from the workplace. And that might mean actually, lots of workplaces have open plan, and that might be actually thinking, well, do we have some people work from home one day and have less people on the floor? So it's just planning things so that, and also I guess it still would mean having meetings via Zoom and that sort of thing, and not really having face-to-face meetings, because at the moment we're still essentially like we're in lockdown, but some things are going to be back open again. For businesses that now are suddenly going to be, say, takeaway shops and that sort of thing, they're going to have to think about their handling of the packaging and who's at work and who's exposed to dealing with the food and the packaging, and how it's transported, and how they deliver it and leave it for people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you just you're making me think about many instances at supermarkets where I've seen people using masks and gloves, to the best of their abilities, and then they're returning back to their vehicles and doing a terrible job of removing the PPE and basically contaminating themselves and everything else around them because they just don't know how to use that stuff correctly. And obviously, the duties of the PCBU, the duties of the officer and the worker are still very much there. The Health and Safety at Work Act hasn't gone anywhere. So if employers are now looking at the prospects of getting their teams back out into the workplace, they need to be absolutely sure that not only are they providing the right equipment, but they're actually training the teams to use it in the first place. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
I think that it's not so bad in industries where PPE is their norm. Because they do understand that stuff. But in industries where now you're getting people to wear PPE, or particularly gloves, etc., then they definitely should be looking at the guidance that the Ministry of Health has put in terms of donning and doffing and cleaning of PPE, or whether I think anyway with gloves and that you just dispose of them. You don't actually wash them or try and do that. And still, I think the problem with PPE, as we know in general in health and safety, is that it makes people feel like they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof and maybe not follow necessarily all the controls that they should be following still, because they feel that they're protected by the PPE. So it's a matter of making sure that you're also complying, because one of the concerns I have is you now add in other measures that people need to be concerned about and other controls into the workplace, and that also increases the risk in terms of just normal risk in the workplace, because you've still got to, now you're in a new environment where you're dealing with the hygiene controls as well as having to deal with the normal controls. So you've actually added more in for your workers to actually cognitively deal with. And so I think that that's really important, that it might take people longer to do tasks because they might, in order to do it with less people in proximity with one another, you're going to have to accept that it might be a bit slower to get some things done.
Yeah, definitely, and obviously things like the engagement, participation, representation of your workforce is still there also. So I'm just thinking about the high risk industries, construction, for example, where the teams ought to be doing daily pre-starts before they kick into their duties during the day. That's one thing, but on the other hand, obviously we still need to be protecting them from cross-contamination from one another. So I mean, I've seen some great examples of where those pre-start meetings are taking place, where the guys are all spread out really wide. They're being talked to very briefly about what's going on for the day ahead, planning, and then simply getting back to their bubbles and working as best to their ability in isolation with their particular bubble on that site. I think that's basically going to become the norm for a lot of
well, the likes of forestry, like that's one of the industries that'll be going back. You know, there are ways in which you could actually run a toolbox meeting because you're required to have those, but that you could do them via Skype or whatever when people are actually not there. I mean, the thing for forestry as well will be that they have people that travel together in vehicles, so they need to probably make sure that it's the same bubble traveling in the same vehicles each time to work. I mean, forestry, there's certainly they're working quite often as lone workers, so there's actually that separation distancing's okay, and if they're working within plant and that, then that's actually not too bad. But of course, you know, with your plant, and if other people are going to be going into your bulldozer after you and that, then you probably need to do the hygiene practices of cleaning it down and wiping down the surfaces and wiping down the controls, etc., before the next person comes in. And then you probably want them to do a wipe down when they come in too, because you know, who knows how good someone else did it before you.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. Yeah, so basically it's just, I guess it's just reminding everyone of their responsibilities to take care of themselves, take care of those around them, and obviously to follow workplace instructions. So I imagine right now, if there isn't already, there really ought to be quite a scramble to develop safe work methodology statements, standard operating procedures, safe work policies, just purely around the new hygiene requirements for some of these industries. Is that something from your perspective? Have you been helping in that world? I know
we've been sort of gathering together. I mean, I guess that this week will get more full on in that regard, but we've been keeping a repository of, particularly in relation to a lot of our clients are construction-based clients, so keeping a repository of what guidance has come out around in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. I think we talked about previously, Safe Work Australia had, because they continued on with their construction, had some quite good guidance in that regard. And so we've been making sure that people get the guidance that they need. Matt's checklist is very, very good that advanced safety's created, and it certainly makes you work through and think about and plan before you go in. I think that, you know, the real risk will be people have been concerned about the economy and about themselves and about their businesses and losing money, and rightly so, and definitely concerned about the viability of their business, but also being able to continue to employ their employees. And coming down out of lockdown and suddenly being sprung out into the world, you know, the concern would be that people might jump out and start to just operate as they always did before all of this. And while that would be really nice to be able to do that, we do have to recognise that we are sort of slowly coming out of a major crisis. And I don't think anyone would want people within our workplaces to get sick because of being at work. And also, look, you undo everything great about the commercial aspects of returning to work if then suddenly you have a large amount of your workforce that gets sick again and then have to be not at work. So
Yeah, which kind of leads quite neatly into, I'm just going to see if I can post this up. Oh, there we go. I just got this new function. So this is from Norman Watson. He's just mentioned that within the vegetable growing, harvesting community that have still been in action over this period, they seem to have got some processes and practices in place. And it would be well worth following their recommendations and ideas. And I know for sure that there have been other sectors and industries that have been able to continue working even under level 4, who I'm sure would be able to get information and what's worked and what hasn't worked from them over the next few days and weeks to come. I mean, this is a really great space for it. The New Zealand Health and Safety Professionals Facebook group has been a really great source of up-to-date information. And during some of our networking groups that we've done online, we've actually heard from people on the ground about what some of those practices have actually looked like in practice.
I was incredibly impressed with the plumbing industry, etc. But even before MB put out their own guidance, actually jumped ahead and did some research and put out some guidance. So their initial response, from what I understand, they had looked to a lot about what plumbers, etc., had done in Italy and other Spain, and so they then looked at that and they got out to their members pretty quickly some guidance around that, and I think that that's great. And certainly if your industry that you are working with doesn't have guidance, then you need to be looking to the likes of the UK or I'm not sure about the OSHA guidance. The Canadian guidance certainly looks quite good to me. I haven't had a good look at OSHA stuff from the US, but given that there's not been much unity around what sort of happened federally, it may not be quite as good. I think just have to be a bit careful in terms of looking at what stage the guidance was created at, what place it was in that country's sort of journey with COVID before deciding whether or not to apply it here.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, you can compile all of this guidance and material from external sources, but there's still the real key component is running it past the people that are actually going to put it into practice. So getting input and feedback from your teams that will be out there doing it. Because I know, I mean, one of the downfalls or pitfalls for many businesses when they find themselves in bother with WorkSafe or in courts is that they may not necessarily be breaching the act, but they instead are breaching what their policy and process documents are spelling out. So it's trying to marry up what's actually happening in practice with what good looks like as well. It's so important.
I guess, you know, your own documents, if your documents are correct and they reflect what the law says, and you've committed to that process or safe work process, then you're always going to be assessed against that by WorkSafe. You're going to be assessed mostly against the law because if what you've got in place is wrong and you're not following it anyway. But yeah, you know, your standards practices that you're meant to have and deal with certainly need to be sorted.
Yes.
And it might be a good time too to review whether or not your current practices are actually appropriate.
Oh, totally. I mean, what a perfect time to be reviewing the whole thing, really. And you know, if you've got a health and safety management system or an integrated management system, if you haven't already, I would certainly be going through that with a fine-tooth comb right now, just to make sure that things that have that say they've been reviewed have actually in fact been reviewed, and the accuracy of what's in there.
And by the right people, sorry, mate, too. You know, like half the problem as a ex-prosecutor was that I would see that the hazard and risk assessment was done by somebody who had no training in those areas and did not actually understand what a hazard or a risk was, and then they just thought up what was a good idea for a control, and they got the whole analysis wrong in terms of whether it was a critical risk or not. And so if you're going to trust people with your business and doing things and that, then you certainly have to be sorry, someone's trying to ring me, so I'm just going to tell them no. You certainly have to be sure that the people that you're entrusting to do those very important tasks like hazard and risk assessment actually have the ability to do that.
Totally. Yeah. Again, I see it lots where often by default it's the administrator or someone in middle management that may not necessarily be that popular within the business have been lumped with the health and safety responsibilities, and they just pull things out of thin air, copy and paste things that they might come across on the computer screen and hope for the best. There's a nice question that's just come through from Matt. I'll just share this one real quick. We go. So he is interested in our thoughts on whether there needs to be a policy for managing the information gathering that businesses need to do when returning to work, managing compliance with HASANZ and privacy. So what do you reckon, DeAnne?
Well, I mean, one of the requirements in terms of ensuring contact tracing and the ability to be able to do that if somebody were to get sick in the workplace means that you do need to keep a register of who's actually coming into the workplace. But for most places like construction sites and that, you want to have control over who's coming in and when anyway. Alert 3, we're not really having receptions open. Like my law firm's not going to be back running doing that or having a receptionist there. So that's not going to be a major issue, but people coming into factories or couriers, etc., arriving, you're going to have to get them to sign in. So you want to have a good register of that to keep track of what time of the day they came in, when they came in, when they left, so you know how long they were there for and who they were in contact with. In terms of the privacy question, that's quite a different question, and I'm wondering if that's relating to more along the lines of what happens if somebody in the work, so forgive me, the other Matt, and you can correct me if I'm not right in the assessment of that question, but that's around what if someone in the workplace actually ends up having COVID, what are your obligations in terms of privacy? I think that's maybe where he's coming from. The Ombuds, the Privacy Commissioner has put out some guidance around that, but the real issue there is, no, as an employer, you shouldn't be going around telling everybody which one of your workers has COVID. That's actually a very serious privacy breach. But you liaise with the Ministry of Health, who actually do all of that contact because they have the mandate and ability to do so with the workers in your workplace as they go through the contact tracing and work through who may have been exposed and who needs to be isolated and that. So that's not your job. You leave that to the Ministry of Health to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's a great answer. And again, I guess just so many unknowns at the moment. It's just trying to pick through it all. That's great advice. For those that are just tuning in, we're very fortunate enough to be joined by DeAnne. She is a senior solicitor at Morrison Kent Lawyers and a previous chief prosecutor for WorkSafe NZ. We've been running these live videos now since Covid19 level 4 kicked off. It's been a real privilege to be able to talk to some of the subject matter experts out there. So it's been great to catch up with you, DeAnne. It's been awesome. So please keep your questions coming in. They're coming in thick and fast. I'm just trying to keep up with them all. Let me have a look. So yeah, this is a great comment actually, and it will be interesting to see your thoughts on this and whether this is news to you too. So today, obviously, DeAnne has just announced additional information around what level 3 will look like. She's talked to us about the fact that construction and businesses that cannot function by working remotely will, in most instances, be able to get back into work so long as there is a safe system of work in place and managing the risks that were there before and now with the COVID epidemic or pandemic. You can still hear me? Oh, hello, I'm back.
You went very slow for a minute, Matt. You slowed down and we're in slow motion. So you might want to just repeat that question.
Sure, it might just sum up how I'm feeling. No. One of the things that the PM did mention is certifying in regards to their compliance to having a safe system of work. Hello, I'm back again. I'll ask my question and stop. So DeAnne, is this news to you? Have you heard about this self-certifying process with MB?
I didn't. I mean, I was listening and making notes as we were watching, and I didn't quite pick up on the self-certifying. But aside from that, in any case, that's essentially what you do every day about health and safety compliance, right? You are actually, the obligation is on the PCBU to actually ensure that they're complying with the requirements of the Act. So ensuring that they are dealing with hazard and risk as it arises, and making sure that they put the right controls in place and that they're working with their safe work practices. So this is no different. This is not anything novel. It is just that it's in the context of health as opposed to safety.
Yeah.
Let's not overcomplicate it.
Yes. Yeah. Great point. Yeah, absolutely true. And yeah, a big believer in that too. Is that it doesn't have to be rocket science, and really, all it should require is a review of your existing hazard and risk registers and your control methodologies. And if you're a bit weak on the occupational hygiene side of things, maybe it's time to review that and bolster it up a wee bit. That's really.
I think most people are. I mean, like I've mentioned this before, this is not the flu, and let's be clear, it's not. There's quite a lot of characteristics about COVID that make it even more risky than the flu. But, influenza could still rip through your workplace, and that was always an obligation for you to consider health in terms of the workplace and the workers within it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So was there anything in the Prime Minister's announcements today that struck you as a surprise or unexpected?
There's some interesting stuff around what years are allowed to go back to school. That was sort of an interesting way of managing the risks around the school community.
Yes.
Some very valid questions from the media about what if your children have contact with grandparents in their 70s, 60s? Should they be going to school? It's probably a question for parents to really seriously consider, given that children can be a vector and a carrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess what they're doing is giving you the opportunity, particularly if you have to return back to work, to have the option of your children go to school, but you've got to weigh that up as a parent in terms of what that means and about keeping bubbles and that sort of thing. I mean, it's quite nice to see, and I think, I've had concerns about people's mental health well-being and that during this time, and it's nice to see that people will have the opportunity to widen their bubbles and connect up with maybe some people that they need to connect up with, or family members that they've been concerned about, and that sort of thing. So that's a good thing for the community, and that care workers, etc., will be able to get back into people's houses and help them out, which is a really important too. And that raises some things for those care workers as well about their own adherence to hygiene, and also making sure that the person that they're going to actually is being honest about whether or not they've been unwell and those sort of things. So it's a lot of almost, if we put it in a health and safety context, it's like pre-qualifying things before you go into them, and a lot about induction. It's like induction, right?
That's exactly right.
Let's know who's coming in, and ask the right questions and have the right things in place, and make sure that things are very clean. So like the Prime Minister said, treat yourself like you've got COVID.
Yeah, that's great advice. For us, we've got 5 young kids at home. 3 of them are at school, 2 preschoolers, and the temptation would be to get them all back into school ASAP. However, our circumstances are that we have one of our kids is more susceptible and vulnerable to health issues. We also have a carer who comes in to help support with our daughter. She has she was born with Down syndrome, so she's got lots of interesting characteristics, and certainly keeps us busy, and we get as much help as we can with her. But We know that it's not in our interest to be rushing back into the school environment for her, and also we'll need to manage the reintroduction of our carer back into the household as well, and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what our expectations are of each other, and making sure that we're all keeping each other safe. So
and it's risk for schools too, like teachers, teachers have also got often families and children of their own, and so you put them back into a workplace where they're exposed to people from lots of different bubbles.
Absolutely.
I mean, Taiwan did that quite well. They disinfected the children as they went into school each day. It was quite interesting to watch the videos about that stuff. But you just got to think too that the people that are going back into the workplace, yes, the risk is getting lowered, and the numbers that we're seeing, as Dr. Bloomfield said, are reflective of what's happened 2 weeks prior. So we would expect a trailing off maybe with the Rosewood situation in Christchurch, that probably hasn't come to full fruition yet. So we're seeing that there's still some people in critical condition, as you would expect, and they keep on saying that to us. So what we need to do is still be managing the risk appropriately, regardless of whether or not the numbers themselves look like they're coming down. Like, don't take assurance from the numbers, take assurance that you're doing the right thing in the workplace in terms of hygiene.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got a neat question that's just come through from Brendan Ward. So we are a labour hire company. We do not have control over the workplace or direct influence over the work. What guidance can you give in terms of our requirements? We have guidance from our consultants, or for our consultants, and the clients we're placing with clients. I actually hear these types of questions from labour hire organisations all the time. I mean, I'll just jump in and say a lot of this comes back to the types of agreements that you have long before you send your people to those sites. But DeAnne, what would you like to say to that particular question?
Labour hire companies do have some more control than I think they realise.
Yes.
And it does come down to the contract. I will supply labour to you, but only if you have the right things in place in your workplace. So what we've done for people who have also been sending subcontractors in, because that's analogous, right? We've done variation contracts during this period to actually say, you must have the following things in place, and you must ensure that if we're going to send people there, we want to know that you will follow the Ministry of Health guidelines in terms of dealing with separation distances, etc. We've actually put all of the controls into those contracts. So we've actually been explicit and very clear about what must be done, and on the basis that those people are being supplied to that workplace. So I think you have an opportunity to say you want labour during this time, then we need to get a variation on our unusual contracts, and we'd like to know what you have in place. But actually, as a labour hire company anyway, you should be asking those questions about what they have in place in terms of health and safety, because you still have a duty under Section 34 to actually consult and coordinate and determine what their controls are. And if you think their controls are good, then you leave it to them. If not, you can have your own health and safety policies that your people that you supply must actually come under.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when it comes to, I know a lot of the agencies, the term consultant often is in regards to their members of the team that go out onto the construction sites or wherever to make sure that their people were being looked after safely. I think their role is critical to ensure that the agreed controls and the way in which these guys are being looked after in the place of work is in fact actually happening in practice.
Well, it's an audit, right? You actually go in and you audit. You say, show me your compliance with the policies that you say you have. Why do you say you're compliant? In terms of the workers that you're supplying as a labour hire company, then you also want to make it very clear to them that if they're unhappy, they can step off the site and give you a call and tell you that they actually don't believe those hygiene controls are actually being followed. And you deal with that on behalf of them, and you say that person's not coming back in until we're assured that actually the things are put in place. I mean, look, you've got to weigh up too, is that person being over the top in that? But in most instances, I doubt that people would be. If they're going to point out that there's a problem, there's generally a problem. And if you tell them what the rules are that need to be followed, and they see that they're not being followed, they should have every right to have you advocate for them as a labour hire company to say, no, this is not good enough.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it comes right back to the whole, you always have the right to say no. And I guess that will probably, the power to enact that right will no doubt be exercised more and more as time goes on. And to help navigate that, I imagine a lot of business owners and senior managers need to, well, they really ought to talk to their team about that, to remind them that they have the right to say no, but also how to manage those instances. So it's not a case of, okay, we'll pack up and go home. It's like, well, we'll make ourselves safe. We'll call our head office to have a conversation to try and see how we can navigate this and get beyond this situation.
Well, there's multiple things there. Like there's there's the ability for a worker to say no to work, but that worker has to notify and give a chance for that to be rectified. If a health and safety representative notifies, then it's deemed to be that they've actually determined that there is actually that imminent or potential risk of harm. Yes. If you notify and nothing's done, then you're permitted to cease work, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're permitted not to be at work, because what the PCBU has to do is actually find you other tasks to do while you resolve the safety issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So so you as a PCBU can't be going and firing someone for refusing work, or putting them on unpaid leave, or doing that sort of thing. So far as you can actually move them on to another task that doesn't have the same risks, then you do that.
Yeah, definitely. So I imagine it's safe to assume that there's, many of the businesses right now that are really financially hurting. I imagine that health and safety is probably shifted further down the priority list than prior to COVID-19. So for those businesses, what advice would you give to those that are really, feeling the pinch and beginning to think about relaxing health and safety within their business?
The relaxing of health and safety if you've already got good practices in place is counterproductive. If you already have those practices in place, then you're not actually having to spend any money to ensure that they're complied with, because it should be part and parcel of the way that you do your work. New innovations and maybe buying of new and different plant, that might not happen at the moment, but just be making sure that what you actually do use is fit for purpose and appropriate. And one would think you were hopefully compliant before this all happened anyway. I'd like to put a bit of faith in New Zealand business that they were, and if not, that you're working towards maturity and compliance. But it doesn't mean that you throw out those practices just because you're financially strapped. You might want to consider about where you put resources at the moment. But you can still, they're not mutually exclusive. You can still be doing the health and safety side of things, just maybe not actually installing like the new light curtains that you were going to put in, as opposed to fixed guarding or some of those other things, but you're still managing your risks appropriately. You're just not doing the newfangled things, or buying plant that's not as noisy as what it was before because you can't afford to buy new plant, and that's okay.
Yes.
But things like if you work with hazardous substances and that, you should be still dealing with excursions and that appropriately, and you should be still thinking through and using the GRIM regs in terms of dealing with the hierarchy of controls, and that you don't drop those things. They're still important, because the other thing about that is COVID's not going to be an excuse if you breach the act and then you're prosecuted.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just a really timely reminder that, the acts haven't disappeared, and it's equally as important as the Employment Relations Act and so many other pieces of legislation that business owners need to be aware of, particularly when times get sticky and tricky like now. So we've been online for a little while now. This would be a good opportunity for anyone to fire any last few questions through. But is there anything that we haven't talked about yet, DeAnne, that you'd like to mention before we begin to wrap up?
Just, like the stuff that we're talking about, that we're talking about labour hire and that sort of thing, and subcontractors. Not that I'm trying to drum up lots of work in terms of lawyers drafting contracts, but I actually do think that there's a real need to ensure that contracts actually fully and strongly address health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that they that the Section 34 duty actually becomes not only a legislatively enforceable one, but one that you actually hold each other to account for. If you agree on what controls need to be in the workplace, that you actually have it in writing and you hold each other to account for those. That is the intention of the Act. That's why you're meant to actually work through those things and coordinate and cooperate. It isn't for the sake of ticking off a section of the Act and saying we've complied with that. It is all about getting you talking about health and safety. So at the moment, and going back into workplaces and dealing with the risks associated with COVID, you should be having those discussions, those Section 34 discussions. You should say, hey, what are you guys doing about that? Or how are you going to deal with it? And my crane driver needs to come into your site, but he's not really part of you guys' bubble. So how are you going to keep people away from him?
Yeah.
And what about facilities? Like, are you going to have certain bubbles using bathrooms, facilities, their own ones, and lunchrooms and those sort of things? Like, how are you going to, or do you clean down that lunchroom and then let the next shift of people go in there so that there's not actually a whole lot of people in the lunchroom at a time?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Saying that, that's worst case scenario, that there's suddenly there's a new oh gosh, I've forgotten the word they're using now. When there's a sudden explosion of numbers within a particular work group. So let's say
second wave within a work group.
Yeah, or where there's a series of infections within a work site, for example. Is it likely that that place of work would be investigated to discover whether there were failures or breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act?
There's a possibility. WorkSafe has put out their policy of intent during the time frame, and they've said that they understand that people may not have the same things in place in their workplaces at the moment than what normally would be, but that their expectation is that they'll be compliant with health and safety. It's not to say. I mean, I think I mentioned on a previous talk with you, Matt, that there is a section of the Act also that allows WorkSafe to take into account other legislation when determining whether or not there's been a breach of the Act. So some breaches of the Health Act or that sort of thing could actually be taken into account as well, in determining whether or not they actually met their primary duty or any other duty under the Act. I mean, generally it's going to be the primary duty, right? But yeah. And it's not just your own workers. You've got to think that your obligation under the Act is also to other people.
Yes.
Who are impacted by the workplace, who come into your workplace. So you're actually managing the risks for anybody that you're going to be wanting to come in the workplace. So the question is, do people need to actually come into your workplace that aren't actually within your scope or your sphere? And do you want someone coming into the bubble, the workplace bubble, that doesn't need to be there at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, it just brings it right back to pre-qualifying your visitors and those that are, may or may not need to come to that place of work, which actually leads quite neatly to our last question, which has just come through, and it's just a general question around what is best health and safety practice to follow when working in an office environment to eliminate the spread of COVID-19. And I think we've probably talked about this a little bit over the last 40 minutes or so, and certainly in our previous sessions, where ultimately, regardless of what the business is, the business should already have a hazard and risk register in place, that many of the practices that are required to eliminate or at least minimize the risk of COVID-19 in the place of work should already be identified and listed. Good occupational hygiene practices, regular hand washing, minimizing the number of people you come into contact with, minimizing the face-to-face meetings and using modern technology. And that, I guess, also asking the question, do you actually need to be there at this point in time, is probably some of the answers to that question.
Who needs to be in the workplace?
Yeah.
Like, for what reason do they need to be there at the moment? Can the work be done from home?
Yeah.
If it can't be done from home, where's your reason or justification for that? Because if you are questioned about it, you're still going to have to answer that question.
Yep.
Can we do the work so we have work done in shifts, that we maybe have some people in the workplace in the morning and some people in the afternoon, or we keep people split from one another or in different parts of the factory or the building, so that they don't have to have so much saturation and can keep the distancing. So it's about planning work, which we actually, I think, when we start getting freaked out about whether or not what we're doing is the right thing, then we're actually overthinking it a bit, because in terms of work on a daily basis, you still think about what risks there are, and you still plan ahead in terms of tasks. Some of it you've done it well in advance by having your safe work practice, and then you invariably follow that, right? But once you actually work out what to do in the workplace, and there's guidance on the Ministry of Health site, MB has guidance as well about how to have cleanliness, how to do the separation, how to contact trace, all of those things. Once you've got those in place, and then they become your new norm in terms of a safe work practice on top of your other ones, then actually that it's not so difficult once you actually know what you're doing. Once everybody knows what the rules are and they follow them, it's not so much of a problem. The biggest problem in the workplace is going to be, what are you going to do if people don't follow them?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess it's a real test of the strength of the existing health and safety management system, a test of culture, and a test of leaders being prepared to actually stand by what they've written in writing. I think it's all going to come to the fore over the next few weeks. I think it's going to be really interesting times for everyone.
And there's not everything you can control either, in terms of the person who asked that question. Whether or not someone washes their hands appropriately after they've been in the bathroom, and that you're not going to control that. There's going to be a lot of trust on actual workers to do the right thing. And that's about ensuring that people are aware of their collective responsibility to do those things and the impact that their actions have on other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so it really does come back to the be kind, and to trust one another, and to just follow those instructions. But certainly, when offered the opportunity to provide input and to provide suggestions, is to do so. It's so critical and important during this time.
And report back of the things that if you're a worker or health and safety representative, and you think that those things aren't working properly, or they could be done better, then tell your employer. Most PCBUs are wanting, not all, I would say, wanting to do the right thing. Some of them are like all of us, are actually learning as we go about infectious diseases and contagions, and how disease transfers and all the rest. And even though people like Matt and I have done some postgraduate study that covers off this sort of stuff, I wouldn't say I was an expert in it, and I'm certainly looking to the Ministry of Health for their guidance in that too. So go to good sources, go to the right places, go to the COVID-19 website. make sure that your practices that you're putting in place align with what health risk management should look like. Don't overdo things. If you don't need PPE, because that's going to add another layer in terms of people having to try and remember things, then don't do it. But go to the Ministry of Health website and have a look at when PPE is required and in what circumstances. But I think most people returning at Alert 3 are not going to be needing to wear PPE based on the Ministry of Health guidelines.
Yeah, that's right. There's also been some really good material for the construction sector from the Construction Health and Safety Association of New Zealand. They've produced some really good stuff. It looks like they're about to release some guidelines or guidance for the construction industry to manage the level 3 and beyond. So definitely keep an eye on that website too if you're in that sector. Awesome. This has been really valuable. Thank you once again.
No worries.
So look, I think we'll wrap up now, DeAnne. I know, like you, it's all flat out at the moment, so it really is good to talk again. Look, as before, I'm sure we'll keep this conversation going because things are changing so rapidly at the moment. Anyway, I will mention it's not necessarily a plug. It's just it's a free resource that we put together here at Advanced Safety. So yes, I'm the founder of NZHSP, but I also happen to be the director of Advanced Safety. We put together a checklist for the return to work. So this will help you basically ensure that you're not missing any key things that you should be considering now before getting back into work. So very simple checklist that will help you navigate those tricky questions and bring a little bit of certainty to uncertain times. So please feel free to take advantage of that. It's all free. It's all readily there and accessible. Awesome. Okay. Well, look, I think we'll leave it there. So
thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much again. And yeah, we'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks. See you.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.